A king, the most powerful man in 9 realms, walked into a hall full of warriors, commanders, and foreign lords, and dropped to one knee. Not before a throne. Not before a rival. Before a blind girl, barefoot on cold stone, with stitches still fresh across her eyes. The entire hall went silent. His own men didn't move. Even the man who had come to claim her as a bride took a step back. And then in front of every witness, the Wolf King looked up at a woman who couldn't see his face and said, "I'm sorry for not telling you who I was." She had bound his wounds in the dark the night before, believing he was nothing but a stranger. Why would a king kneel before someone the whole world had already forgotten, and what did he see in her that no one else could? Watch till the end to find out what really happened that morning. The bone needle was cold between Yara's fingers, colder than the night air seeping through the gaps in Senna's hut, and she turned it once against her thumb before handing it over. "Steady," Senna murmured, more to herself than to Yara. The old healer's hands smelled of juniper smoke and dried yarrow, a smell Yara had memorized the way other girls memorized faces. Yara sat on the low stool, spine straight, chin tilted toward the lamp she couldn't see. Her right eye had been closed for 3 winters now, the lashes grown together over careful stitching. Tonight was the left. "You don't have to do this tonight," Senna said the words a formality, a door left open out of kindness rather than expectation. "Tomorrow, the wolves come," Yara said. Her voice carried the evenness of someone reciting a fact about weather. "I would rather choose my darkness than have it chosen for me." Senna's breath caught not surprise, but something gentler. An old grief surfacing and resettling. She said nothing more. The needle found skin. The first stitch was a single thread of fire drawn along Yara's eyelid. She did not flinch. She had learned, long ago, that flinching only made it last longer. It was on the 3rd stitch that the door burst inward. Cold air rushed in pine sap, frost and underneath it. Sharp and immediate, the copper tang of fresh blood. A man's weight hit the doorframe and slid, and there was the heavy, ragged sound of someone trying very hard not to make a sound at all. "I need." The voice was low, roughened by pain, swallowed halfway through. "A healer. I was told there was a healer here." "I have 1 set of hands, and they are occupied." Senna did not turn. "Sit, press something to it. I will come when I come." The bench by the door scraped. A hiss of breath through clenched teeth. Yara sat very still, half her vision a perfect, familiar black, the other half staring at nothing, because there was nothing to see in the dim hut beyond shapes and shadow. But her ears had no lids to close. She heard the wet sound of cloth pressed to a wound. She heard the stranger's breathing fast, then slower, then fast again, the rhythm of someone fighting to stay conscious through sheer will. "There's linen in the chest by the hearth," Senna said, not looking up. "The girl can tell you where everything is. She knows this hut better than I do." She felt the stranger's attention land on her the way she felt a draft shift in the air's weight. A beat of silence, as if he were deciding whether to trust directions from someone with a needle in her face. "The chest is to your left," Yara said. Before he could ask, "Beneath the window. The linen is folded on top. Don't dig for the bandages underneath. Those are for burns. They're soaked in something that will sting worse than whatever you've got." A pause. Then, quietly, "Thank you." His voice had changed in that one word, less guarded, almost surprised, as if he hadn't expected an answer at all, let alone a useful one. She heard him move, the creak of the chest lid, the rustle of linen, heard his hiss as he pressed the cloth against his side. "The water's in the pot near the fire," she added. "Warm, not hot. Wring the cloth before you use it, or you'll push the dirt deeper." "You've done this before." "I've watched it done, many times." A dry note crept into her voice. There isn't much else to do here at night when you can't see. The stitching continued. Yara kept her chin steady, listening to the stranger fumble with cloth and water, listening to him swear softly when the wound stung. "You're doing it wrong," she said, after a moment. "You're holding it too loosely. Press harder. Yes, like that. Now hold it. Don't let go until the bleeding slows. It already hurts." "It will hurt less than the alternative." A short, surprised exhale, almost a laugh, cut off by pain. "You're very calm for someone with a needle going through her face." "I asked for it," Yara said simply. The hut went quiet, except for Senna's needle and the stranger's breathing, slowly evening out as the cloth did its work. "Why would anyone ask for that?" he said. After a while, something in his voice had lowered, changed. "Not a weakness. Curiosity, maybe. Or the particular honesty that comes in the dark, between strangers who will never see each other's faces." Senna's needle paused, just for a heartbeat before continuing. Yara turned the question over, feeling its edges before she answered. "There is nothing frightening," she said slowly, "about a woman who chooses her own darkness." The silence that followed was different from the others. It had weight, a held quality, a breath caught mid-inhale and not released. She heard it in his stillness, heard the cloth in his hand stop moving, heard the sharp catch of his breath, audible even over the hearth. She would never know what his face was doing, but the silence told her something had happened, something small, strange, and entirely his. Senna tied off the final stitch with practiced efficiency, snipped the thread with her teeth, and turned toward the man by the door, and Yara heard the healer's posture shift, a small intake of breath that meant recognition quickly suppressed. "Now," Senna said, voice carefully neutral, "let's see what you've done to yourself." The wound, Yara learned through her hands rather than her eyes, was a long gash along the man's ribs, deep enough to need more than linen, shallow enough that he would live if it didn't fester. Senna cleaned it while muttering about fools on mountain roads and the man Cass, he offered, when Senna asked, the way someone says a name they've borrowed, rather than Warren answered in short, careful sentences. "An escort, traveling ahead of a larger party, ambushed on the road." When Senna finished, she turned back to Yara. "Can it wait until morning?" "No," Yara said. "Finish it now." Senna sighed, lit a second lamp, and the needle came again cold, then warm with blood, then cold. She did not know then that the stranger had gone still on the bench, that he was truly watching as the last sliver of her sight was sewn shut, deliberately, calmly, by her own choosing. The final stitch went in, and then there was darkness, total, complete, the kind that did not flicker, because there was nothing left to cast shadows. Yara breathed. It felt, as it always did, like setting down something heavy she had been carrying without realizing its weight. "There," Senna said softly. "Done. How do you feel?" "Lighter," Yara said honestly. From the bench, the stranger made a small sound. Not quite a word, something between disbelief and reverence. Senna excused herself for fresh bandages, leaving the two of them in the firelight, though only one of them could call it that anymore. Yara heard the man struggling, the soft scrape of him trying to wrap his own ribs one-handed. "You're doing it wrong again," she said. "Wrapping a wound one-handed is harder than it looks," he replied, and there was real humor in it now, dry, low. She rose and crossed the room without hesitation. She knew every uneven board, every worn patch of rushes. She found him by the warmth of him, by the smell. Blood and pine, and something underneath that she couldn't name, something like warm stone after rain, a scent that didn't belong to the mountain or the village. "Hold still," she said. His breath caught that same small catch from before as her hands found his side, found the loose edge of linen, found the wound itself, careful and light. She mapped its length with her fingertips the way she mapped everything she needed to remember. It was deep, but clean-edged. A blade, not a claw. "You're tense," she observed, winding the linen tighter. "It heals faster if you breathe." "Forgive me," he said, and his voice had dropped lower still, roughened in a way that had nothing to do with pain. "I'm not accustomed to." He stopped. "To what?" "To someone's hands on me, when I can't see their face either." Yara paused. "Does it trouble you?" "No," he said too quickly, then, more honestly, "No, it doesn't." She finished the wrap, tied it off the way Senna had taught her. Her fingers brushed his skin one last time as she pulled away, and beneath her fingertips she felt his heart beat fast. Then, in the space of a breath, slowing, settling, as if her hands had told his body something his mind hadn't caught up to yet. "What should I call you?" he asked. "A man should know who to thank." "They call me the blind cat here," Yara said, stepping back. "No bitterness in it, only fact. You may call me whatever you like. Tomorrow, I'll have a different name in their mouths anyway." Before she could decide whether to explain, Senna's footsteps returned. "Tomorrow the king's retinue arrives," Senna said, settling into her chair with fresh bandages. "The tribute rite," and Howard, her voice flattened around the name, "means to give Yara to Gorham of Ironhold, part of the tribute dressed up as diplomacy." The room went still. Yara felt it before she understood it, a shift in the air near the stranger, subtle but unmistakable, like the moment before a storm breaks. His breathing didn't change. His posture didn't change. But something in him had gone cold and sharp. "Gorham of Ironhold," he repeated. "Flat. Thoughty. Careful." "You've heard of him," Senna said. "I've heard of him," the stranger agreed, and said nothing else. He rose to leave sometime later. At the door, he paused. "Thank you," he said to Senna, but Yara felt the words pass over her too, like a hand almost extended and then withdrawn. "For the binding. Both of them." "Go carefully," Senna said. "And don't bleed on my doorstep, it stains." The door opened, let in a gust of cold mountain air, and closed again. His footsteps faded into the night. It was only after Senna had gone to bank the fire that Yara found a small weight on the table near where the stranger had sat, where it hadn't been before. A coin. Silver, heavier than any coin she'd ever held, with something raised on its surface that her fingers traced slowly. A wolf's head. Eyes closed. Senna picked it up, declared she'd return it, set it back down with a soft clink. Yara reached out and picked it up again, almost without deciding to. Strangely heavier than it should be, warmer than metal should stay, as if it held some memory of the hand that had carried it. The wolf beneath her fingers, eyes shut, peaceful rather than fierce, felt like something she recognized, though she couldn't have said from where. She slipped it into the pocket of her dress before she could think better of it, and told herself it was only because Senna would forget where she'd left it by morning. Yara woke before dawn, as she always did, to the quiet of the cellar room beneath the great hall. She rose, found her walking stick by touching smooth ashwood, carved with notches that told her distances, a private alphabet only she could read, and made her way along the wall, fingers trailing the touch map carved into the stone. 3 notches left, a deep groove for the bend in the passage, a rough patch where the wall had crumbled and never been repaired. Above, the sounds were different than usual. More voices, more footsteps, the rhythm of preparation, and then, faint through thick stone hoofbeats, many of them with a different rhythm than the village's few horses. "They're here," Yara thought, without alarm. The door banged open before she could reach it. Bran crossed the room in 2 strides and grabbed her arm with the careless urgency of someone who'd stopped thinking of her as a person some time ago. "Your eye," he said. "Your other eye. It's closed," Yara said evenly. "Yes." "Come on. There's no time." He pulled her toward the stairs and kept talking to her more than to her, filling silence because silence made him uncomfortable. "You should be glad, you know, about today. Gorham's agreed to take you. You'll have a household status, a husband who can protect you." "Gorham," Yara repeated, the name from last night attached now to a face she would never see and a future she hadn't chosen. He said it kindly. That was the strange part. He believed entirely that he was delivering good news. Something in her chest tightened, not fear, not yet. The first hairline crack in a stone left too long in frost. The great hall opened around her in sound and smell. Unfamiliar scents, thick in the air, horse and leather, and iron in quantities the hall didn't usually hold, foreign oils on foreign blades, travel-worn cloth. Voices louder than usual, deeper, with accents that curled differently around their words. The king's retinue had arrived, and somewhere among them, Yara thought, pushing the thought away as soon as it formed, was a man with a wound she had bound last night, and a coin shaped like a wolf with closed eyes, still tucked into the pocket of her dress. The tribute rite began as it always did, with Harrick's voice cataloguing the unmated wolves of Hallowmere, like livestock at market. Yara stood in the line with the others, feeling the floor beneath her bare feet, counting footsteps and breathing, waiting the way she waited for weather. Something that would happen regardless of her wishes. And this one, Harrick's voice said closer now, with the particular relish he reserved for her. Perhaps Hallowmere's greatest curiosity. No pack name worth speaking. No wolf to call her own if she ever had one. It's been silent since birth. And as you can see, a theatrical pause, she has taken it upon herself to remove even the use of her eyes. A ripple of laughter from somewhere in the crowd. Yara kept her chin level. She had heard worse. "Which is why," Harrick continued, his voice warming with barely concealed pleasure, "I am pleased to announce a match that honors both Hallowmere and our esteemed neighbors of Ironhold. Gorham steps forward, your bride." Heavy footsteps, deliberate, a smell that arrived before the man's old blood, untanned hide, and beneath it something feral that raised the hair on Yara's arms before her mind named the threat. A hand closed around her wrist, large, calloused, gripping harder than necessary, turning her arm as if checking the quality of meat. Yara stood still. Stillness cost less than struggle. But beneath her ribs, her heart had begun beating faster than it had in years, not the slow, accepting rhythm she'd trained it into, but something wilder, older. And then, beneath the smell of Gorham, beneath blood and iron and unwashed wool, she caught it. Warm stone after rain. Faint at first, then closer, moving toward her with purpose, cutting through the crowd, the way a blade cuts water, and with it, a silence beginning to spread. Voices dying mid-word, the rustle of fabric as dozens of people turn. "Take your hand off her." The voice cut through the hall, and Yara's whole body went still, more still than stillness, because she knew that voice. She had heard it last night, low and rough with pain, asking her name in the dark. Now it carried across the entire hall with an authority that made the air itself seem to bend. Gorham laughed a short, contemptuous bark. "And who in the 9 realms are you two?" The answer was not a voice at all. Dozens of bodies were moving, simultaneously, dropping to their knees. The scrape of boots, the clink of mail, the heavy thud of armored men kneeling on stone, spreading outward from the doors in a wave that reached Gorham's own men last, their confused hesitation audible in the silence. "Your..." Harrick's voice, when it came, had lost every trace of its earlier confidence. It cracked, high and thin. "Your Majesty?" Yara's mind simply stopped. Gaius, the man she had bandaged in the dark. The man whose heartbeat she had felt slow beneath her palm. The man who had asked her name and received instead a riddle about cats and tomorrow. The king. He was close now, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. The same warmth she'd felt last night through his torn shirt. Gorham's grip on her wrist had fallen away entirely. For one long moment, the man who had listened to her in the dark did not kneel, did not speak, did not move. He simply stood there, close enough to touch, as if giving her time to understand, through smell and warmth and the particular quality of his stillness, that this was real. Then the air shifted as he lowered himself, not the way the others had dropped, hurried and formal, but slowly, deliberately, one knee bending until he knelt before her in a hall full of witnesses. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. For her alone, though in the dead silence the words carried to every corner. "For not telling you who I was last night, but I do not regret a single thing you said to me when you believed I was only a stranger with a wound." Her hand moved before she decided to move it, fingers closing around the coin in her pocket, seeking something solid. The wolf with closed eyes, pressed warm against her palm. "Who did this to you?" he asked, and his voice, though gentle, was pitched to carry. "Your eyes." "I did this," Yara said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "To myself." The same answer she'd given last night. But last night had been a declaration between strangers in the dark. Now the hall absorbed it, and she felt Harrick's stillness become something closer to dread. The king rose. As he did, his hand still close to hers drew her fingers from her pocket, and she felt metal against her skin. A ring. A whale. Heavy, cool, carved beneath her fingertips with a shape she already knew. A wolf's head. Eyes closed. The same as the coin. The same, she understood with a quiet certainty that arrived like recognition rather than surprise, as the shape she had traced in the dark last night, and not understood. It was always him. "I understand a marriage was arranged this morning," the king said, turning toward Harrick. The warmth had left his voice entirely, a blade drawn slowly from its sheath. The silence was absolute. "I'm afraid," he continued, almost conversationally, "that she already has another betrothal, to me, since last night, though she didn't know it yet." A beat. Then somewhere in the crowd, a short, startled laugh, quickly smothered, but it broke something in the hall's tension, just slightly. Gorham growled. "Ironhold has rights in this matter." "I will travel to Ironhold and discuss this with you directly," the king said, not unkindly, but with absolute finality. "But the lady is not going anywhere tonight." The lady. Yara turned the words over, strange and unfamiliar, as a coin she didn't recognize the value of. She had not agreed to any of this, not the betrothal, not the rescue, not the sudden dizzying reordering of her entire world. And so, into the silence, she said the only thing that felt entirely her own. "You can stand up now." A ripple of something shock, amusement, disbelief moved through the hall. "My feet are used to the cold," she added, before he could respond. "I don't need rescuing from it." And then, because the morning had already broken every rule she understood about her place in the world, "Last night, I bandaged a stranger's wound out of kindness. Today I know a king anything at all." The silence that followed, and then, breaking it, came a sound Yara had never heard before in this hall, in 3 years of living beneath it. The king of the wolves, laughing. Genuinely, helplessly, the laugh of a man caught entirely off guard by something he hadn't expected to find funny, in a morning that had given him very little to laugh about. The hall did not know what to make of it. Yara, standing in the center of it all, blind and barefoot and utterly unmoved, found that she didn't either. But somewhere beneath her ribs, her heart, which had spent 3 years beating slow and careful and unremarkable, gave one hard, unmistakable thud, and did not quite return to its old rhythm afterward. The knock came after midnight, soft, almost apologetic, the kind that hoped not to be heard and yet needed to be. Yara was already awake. She'd been sitting against the cold stone wall, with the wolf coin between her fingers, listening to the hall settle into sleep above her, and beneath all of it a faint but persistent smell that didn't belong to stone or earth. Blood. Fresh blood. And underneath it, warm stone and pine. She was at the door, before the second knock. "You're bleeding again," she said. A pause. Then, low and rueful, "How did you?" "I can smell it. It's worse than last night." Something almost sheepish entered his voice. "There was an accident during the clearing up. Someone's elbow, my ribs. Very poor timing." Yara opened the door. He was a shape in the doorway, warmth and breath, and the particular density of someone larger than herself, the way a large stone displaces water. The blood smell was sharper now, fresher. "Sen is asleep," Yara said, "and her hut is across the courtyard. You'll bleed through your shirt before you get there." "I know," he admitted. "I came here instead. I'm not entirely sure why." "I am," Yara thought, though she didn't say it. She stepped back and felt for the first time in longer than she could remember a flicker of something that lived in the same part of her chest as nervousness, but wasn't quite that either. She built up the small fire more for him than herself, since she had no need of its light. "Sit," she said, and heard him lower himself down with the same careful control as last night, a man hiding the cost of movement. "You don't have to do this," he said. "I could wait until morning. Find Corvin." "You're already here," Yara said simply. "And I'm already awake." She reached for the hem of his shirt and felt him go still, the same stillness as last night, except now it meant something different. Last night, neither of them knew who the other was. Tonight they both did, and the stillness held something neither of them named. "May I?" she asked. "Yes," he said, and his voice had gone rougher. She peeled the shirt back carefully, and her fingers found warm skin, too warm, hotter than a person should run, like standing near a hearth after the fire's gone out, but the stones still hold the heat. Her palms settled flat against his ribs to steady herself as she worked, and beneath her hand she felt his heart. It was beating fast, faster than blood loss alone could explain. She said nothing about it. She cleaned the wound, pressed the cloth to the wound's edge with a warning, "This will sting," and felt him make a low sound that wasn't quite pain, something closer to a held breath finally released. "Tell me about this scar," she said, her fingers finding an older mark just below his ribs, raised, long-healed, deep once. Not curiosity for its own sake. Something to fill the space between them, something to keep her hands from trembling at the strange new awareness of him. "A blade," he said. "I was 15. My first real battle, though battle is generous. It was more of a slaughter, and I was on the wrong side of most of it." "And this one?" Her fingers moved to a series of small parallel lines along his forearm, too regular to be fighting scars. He went quiet. "Those are something else." "You don't have to tell me." "I want to," he said, and the honesty in it surprised them both. "I was held for 2 years when I was young, by a lord who had taken a fortress in the east, before I had the strength to take it back. Those marks are days. I counted them on the wall of the cell, with whatever I could find sharp enough to cut stone." Yara's hands stilled against his skin. 2 years, she repeated softly. "How old were you when it ended?" 17. Without quite meaning to, her thumb had begun to trace the small lines on his arm, not counting them, but acknowledging them. "I'm sorry," she said. "Don't be," he said quietly. "It made me who I am, for better or worse." The wound was clean, the bleeding slowed to nothing. She reached for the linen and found herself taking longer than the task required, her fingers lingering at the edges of the binding, smoothing it flat, checking a knot that had been secure on the first try. He didn't tell her to hurry. When she finished, neither of them moved. The fire crackled. Old timber settled in the walls above. And between them, in the small cellar room, there was a silence that had weight to it, the kind that exists only between two people who have just realized, simultaneously, that something has shifted, and neither is sure what to do with the knowledge. "Yara," he said her name for the first time in his voice. "Yes?" "Are you cold?" Such a small question, such an ordinary one, and yet something in the way he asked it carefully, almost shy. A king who had commanded armies suddenly uncertain of himself made her chest tighten in a way she had no name for. "A little," she admitted. She heard him move, the soft rustle of fabric, and then something settled around her shoulders, heavy and warm and smelling of him, of warm stone and pine. His cloak. He didn't ask if it was all right. He didn't explain. He simply did it, the way she had bandaged his wound without asking permission for every step, an act that needed no justification because it was simply true. Yara did not push it away. For 3 years, she had flinched from unexpected touches, from cloth or hands, or anything that came without warning. Tonight, the weight of his cloak settled over her shoulders, like something that had always belonged there, and she found to her own quiet surprise that she leaned, very slightly, into its warmth. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. "Will you eat with the pack tomorrow morning?" Yara asked eventually, because someone had to say something. "I will," he said. Then, after a pause that felt deliberate, "on one condition." "What condition?" "That you sit beside me." The fire popped softly. Yara felt the warmth of his cloak around her shoulders, the lingering warmth of his skin against her palms, the strange new knowledge that something in her chest had shifted permanently and would not shift back. "All right," she said, and did not trust her voice to say more than that. The next morning brought Howrick's fury before it brought breakfast. Yara heard it the moment Bran's footsteps came too fast down the cellar steps, heard the sharp intake of breath that meant he'd seen something he didn't like, and then heard, beneath that, the heavier, angrier footsteps of Howrick himself, arriving like a storm front. In the kitchens, Howrick snarled the moment he found her, and his hand closed around her arm. "Now." The kitchen was warm with bread and wood smoke, and old Doreen's quiet presence. Yara could hear her at the hearth, the soft scrape of a spoon against a pot, deliberately not pausing, deliberately not looking up, the careful non-reaction of someone who had learned long ago that attention only made things worse. "You will end this," Howrick said, his voice low now, with the particular danger of a man who believed in his own reasonableness. "Whatever the king thinks he saw last night, you will refuse him, publicly if necessary. And you will apologize to Gorn for the insult to Ironhold. The treaty is worth more than—" "Then what?" Yara asked, and her voice carried an edge that hadn't been there 3 years ago. "Thank you. Don't test me, girl. Your mother thought herself clever too once, and look where—" The slap came without warning. The impact rocked her head sideways, a sharp burst of pain across her cheek. The kitchen went utterly silent. Even Doreen's spoon had stopped. From the doorway, close enough that he must have been standing there some time, came a sharp, indrawn breath. Bran's. He had heard everything. Howrick released Yara's arm and stalked out without another word. Old Doreen was at her side in a moment, weathered hands gentle as she pressed a cool cloth against Yara's cheek. Sit, child. Sit down. I'm fine, Yara said automatically. You're not, and that's all right. A pause, and then, quieter, almost hesitant. Your mother, Lyrian. He did that to her too. More than once. Yara went very still. She had heard so little about her mother, fragments filtered through Harrick's contempt. Foreign, dot. No pack. No worth. Never anything about who Lyrian had actually been. You knew her? Yara asked, and her voice came out smaller than she intended. I knew her, Doreen said softly. She was kind. Frightened, at the end, but kind. She used to sing quietly when she thought no one could hear. I used to listen from the kitchens. The older woman's breath caught just slightly. My own mother had the same trouble with Harrick many years before. I've never told anyone that. I'm telling you now because it seemed like something you should know, that you're not the first woman in this house to survive him. And you won't be the last to see him answer for it. Yara reached out, found Doreen's weathered hand, and held it. Neither of them said anything else for a long moment, but something had passed between them. A thread of shared grief finally given voice, and Yara felt it settle into her chest, alongside everything else that had shifted in the last 2 days. Master Corvin arrived not long after, his hands brisk but not unkind as he catalogued what he found. The fading bruises of old injuries, a rib once broken and healed without proper care, the fresh mark blooming on her cheek. Write it all down, Yara said when he finished. All of it, including this morning. Corvin's pen paused. All of it, he agreed, quietly, and Yara heard something in his voice that she recognized, not pity, but a kind of grim satisfaction. Evidence finally being gathered for a case long overdue. The trial was held that afternoon in the same hall where the tribute rite had taken place the day before, though the air felt entirely different now, charged with something she couldn't name, but could feel pressing against her skin, like the moment before lightning. Cassian laid out the charges. Years of systematic cruelty toward an unmated Omega under his protection, and an arranged marriage conducted without consent, in direct violation of ancient law. Harrick did not deny cruelty. He seemed almost proud of it, framed it as discipline, as necessity, as the burden of leadership that no one else had been willing to shoulder. The marriage, he argued, had been within his rights as regent. The old law says otherwise, Cassian said, and recited it, and the hall murmured. Agreement, a wrong finally named correctly. Then Bran was called to testify. His footsteps were heavy with a weight. Yara recognized a man walking toward something he didn't want to face. When he spoke, his voice was rougher than she'd ever heard it. He's my father, Bran said. He's also the only one who raised me after my mother died from his hand. I'm not defending him. I just A pause, and his voice cracked slightly. I don't understand how someone can save an entire territory from starvation, and also do this. I don't have an answer. I just know both things are true. The hall was silent when he finished. Cassian's verdict, when it came, measured the judgment of a man who had weighed mercy against justice, and found a place where both could exist. Harrick, formerly regent of Hallowmere, you are stripped of your regency, effective immediately. You are forbidden from any contact with Yara, in any circumstance, for as long as you live, and you will be confined to your own household, at the edge of this territory, under guard appointed by your son, who will assume temporary leadership in your place. A pause, and then, quieter. You built much of what stands here. That is not nothing, and it is the reason you still draw breath. But what you did to the people in your care, to Yara, to her mother before her, to others whose names I suspect will never fully know, cannot be undone with a verdict. Only watched, going forward, so it cannot happen again. Yara stood very still as the hall absorbed this. Beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth, Cassian's hand found hers briefly, just for a moment. A touch that asked nothing and said everything. Behind them, Bran exhaled a long, shaking breath, the sound of a man who had just inherited a burden he hadn't asked for, and would carry anyway because someone had to. 10 days passed and Cassian did not leave. He'd given diplomatic reasons, reasons involving iron-hold and treaties and the careful business of kingship and the household, from old Doreen to the stable boys. Understood the reasons were kindness extended to themselves as much as to anyone. No one questioned it aloud. No one needed to. What followed were 10 days that Yara would carry with her, later as the gentlest she had ever known, though gentle was a word she'd never had much use for before. It began with maps. "You're reading it wrong," Yara said, guiding Cassian's hand along the wall of the passage, the touch map she'd carved over years, grooves and ridges that told her where she was, without needing eyes. "That's not a turn-on. That's where the wall is damaged. Feel how it's rougher here, compared to the smooth groove beside it." "I feel a wall," Cassian said with the frustration of a man accustomed to mastering things quickly, encountering something he could not. "Just wall. That's because you're not listening with your hands, you're just touching." "Is there a difference?" "There's an enormous difference." He tried again slower, his large hand moving carefully over the stone, and Yara heard him mutter something under his breath that might have been a curse, might have been her name, might have been both. "This is humiliating," he said, after the third wrong turn. "I have led armies. I have negotiated treaties with men who wanted me dead. And I cannot read a wall." Yara laughed, and it surprised her as much as it surprised him, bright and unguarded, echoing in the stone passage. "There," Cassian said softly. "I've never heard you laugh." "I don't," usually Yara admitted, and felt suddenly shy. "I'd like to hear it again," he said simply, without weight, and Yara felt the words settle into her chest, like a stone dropped into still water, ripples spreading long after the surface had gone quiet. The berries happened 2 mornings later. Yara smelled them before she heard him. Wild strawberries, mixed with the unmistakable evidence of someone who had been crouching in old Doreen's garden, where he absolutely did not belong. "You're stealing," she said, when he settled beside her on the bench outside the kitchen. "I'm gathering," Cassian said, with great dignity. "There's a difference. Doreen will know. She always knows." "Then I am a wanted man," he said gravely. "A fugitive. You're harboring a criminal, Yara. I hope you understand gravity." She bit back a smile, reached out, and caught his hand before he could hide the evidence, felt the telltale stickiness of berry juice on his fingers, and held his hand a moment longer than necessary. "Guilty," she announced. "You'll have to decide my punishment then," he said, and something in his voice had gone lower, an invitation hidden inside the joke. And then without warning she felt something soft brush against her lips. A strawberry, and his fingers, just for a moment, against her mouth as he offered it to her. Both of them went very still. The morning sounds continued around them. Birds, distant kitchen clatter, someone's footsteps crossing the yard, but between them, everything had narrowed to that single point. The warmth of his fingers, the sweetness of fruit, the sudden shared awareness of how close they were. Then at the same moment, as if by silent agreement, they both laughed, breaking the tension before it could become something neither of them was ready to name. That evening he took her to the watchtower. The climb was long, and the wind at the top swept from every direction, making the world feel enormous and the people standing in it very small. "I want to read your face," Yara said, once they'd settled, and felt him go still beside her, not with reluctance, but with anticipation. "All right," he said quietly. Her hands rose and found his jaw, the faint roughness of stubble, the strong line of his cheekbone. She traced upward, slowly, mapping him the way she mapped everything, with patience, committing each detail to memory in the only way available to her. Her fingers found a new scar, low on his side, the wound she'd bound twice now, with her own hand. She pressed her palm against it gently. Cassian's breath left him slowly, and his whole body softened beneath her touch, the way someone relaxes when a weight they've carried for years is, however briefly, shared. "That's the one I gave you," she said softly. "Among other things," he murmured. They sat in silence for a while after that, until he spoke again, quieter, almost reluctant, as if giving her something precious. "There's a wolf in you. I felt it, The moment I first stood near you. Stronger than any wolf I've ever encountered, and it's been hiding. For 23 years, I think. Afraid of something. Yara's hand still. How do you know that? I don't know how I know it, he admitted. I just do. The way I know some things are true before I can explain why. It began to rain while they sat there, a soft rain, the first drops landing on Yara's upturned face, like a question she hadn't known she wanted, answered. We should go in, Cassian said, starting to rise. No, Aji. She caught his sleeve. Stay, please. He settled back down, and for a long moment neither of them moved, letting the rain fall. Yara, with her face turned up to the sky, feeling each drop against her skin, something she had spent 3 years hiding from in the cellar dark, now welcomed for the first time. When they were both thoroughly wet, Cassian shifted, and his cloak came around them both this time, drawing them together beneath it, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him against her side, his heartbeat against her ear, where her head had come to rest against his chest. This is the second time, she thought with small private clarity. The first time he gave it to me alone, to keep me warm. This time, he's keeping us both warm. She didn't say it, but she settled closer, and his arm tightened around her, an answer to a question neither of them had spoken. Their foreheads came together, not a kiss, not quite, but closer than they had been before, close enough that Yara could feel his breath against her face, feel the way it had quickened. I've waited 31 years, Cassian said. The words barely more than a breath. I can wait longer if I must, but I won't pretend I don't want this. Yara didn't answer, but she didn't pull away, and in the rain, beneath the cloak with his heartbeat against her ear and his forehead against hers, that silence said more than any words could have. The peace lasted 4 more days. It ended with a messenger from Ironhold. The news was simple and grim. Gorham had refused every offer of compensation. He considered the humiliation of the tribute right beyond any price, not from love, the rumors said, but from something colder. Honor. There was something else, too, a name that moved through the household in whispers. Lord Dervan. A coastal lord with old ties to Ironhold's warriors, ties that went back years, quietly funding unrest along the borders, the kind of slow-burning instability that weakened kings without ever declaring war on them. Cassian was to leave the next morning for urgent matters of state, matters that required his presence far from Halomir for several days. Yara heard the regret in his voice when he told her, and heard something else beneath it, a carefulness, as if he were leaving something unfinished and didn't like it. Before he left, he found Bran. The men who served under your father, Cassian said, his voice low. Yara, passing through the stone passage nearby, catching only fragments. How many remain unaccounted for? A handful, Bran admitted, the tension in his voice that of a man aware he hadn't finished a task he'd been given. We're still sorting loyalties. It's slower than I'd like because we don't have enough men to remove them all at once, not without leaving gaps in the watch. Be careful, Cassian said. That's all. Just be careful. Yara filed the exchange away without quite knowing why it felt important. A small detail, easily forgotten, the kind that meant nothing until it meant everything. That evening, Cassian found her one last time before his departure. I have something for you, he said, and Yara heard in his voice a careful nervousness she hadn't heard from him before, the nervousness of someone offering something that mattered. He took her hand and pressed something into it, smooth, cool, carved with intricate detail her fingers immediately began to trace. A bracelet, a wolf, and above it, a crescent moon. The lines deep and precise, and somehow alive, the way only a master's work could feel. It's made from polished white ivory, Cassian said, carved by the oldest craftsman in the palace, a man who lost his sight years ago, though his hands never lost their skill. I thought you should have something made by someone who understands you, who creates beautiful things without needing to see them. Yara's fingers still on the bracelet. Something in her chest had gone tight and warm at once, the particular ache of being understood, completely, by someone who had thought of this, specifically, for her. She reached out and found his hand first, and held it. For a long moment she simply held his hand in both of hers, feeling the calluses, the warmth, the slight tremor she suspected he didn't know was there. "Thank you," she said finally, and the words felt too small for what she meant. Only then did she let him fasten the bracelet around her wrist, and even after it was secured, she didn't let go of his hand right away. He left before dawn. Yara felt his absence the moment she woke, a strange hollowness, the household quieter without his presence moving through it, the air itself seeming to have lost some warmth it had carried for 10 days. That night, she woke to wrongness. The smell came first to unfamiliar men, too many of them moving with the careful quiet of people who didn't want to be heard. And beneath that smell, faint but unmistakable, something acrid and bitter that made her wolf the one Cassian had spoken of, the one she'd never felt before stirring for the first time in her life. A sudden surge of instinct screaming danger before her conscious mind had finished waking. Wolfsbane. The door burst open before she could rise. Hands seized her rough, many of them, and a cloth soaked in something that burned was pressed over her mouth and nose before she could cry out. The wolfsbane's scent intensified, and with it came a wrongness in her own body, a fire beneath her skin where the poison touched it, her wolf recoiling and snarling somewhere deep inside her, trapped and furious. She was lifted, carried, and even through the haze of fear and poison, some part of her mind kept working. She felt the ground change beneath the feet of the men carrying her, stone, then dirt, then the softer give of forest floor, a path she filed away without thinking, the way she filed away everything. "Remember this," she told herself, even as panic rose. "Remember every step." The camp smelled of old fires and unwashed men, and Yara was dropped onto packed earth with little ceremony, her wrists bound with ropes soaked in something that burned against her skin. "Well," said a voice heavy, rough, horribly familiar. "Gorham. Look what the king left lying around, unguarded." "You won't get what you want from this," Yara said, steadier than she felt. "I don't want anything from you," Gorham said, and there was real venom in it now. "I want what was taken from me. My honor. In front of 2 territories your king made me a laughingstock. I intend for him to understand exactly what that cost him." Yara said nothing. Instead, her bound hands began to move slowly, carefully, fingers working at the rope with the same patient precision she'd learned years ago during Bran's training sessions, when he taught her without meaning to teach her anything useful, exactly how rope behaved, exactly where its weaknesses lay. The rope gave. What happened next, Yara would only half remember afterward, fragments, sensations, the world tilting and reshaping around her. Pain first. Pain like nothing she'd ever felt, her body folding and reforming, bones shifting, fur erupting from skin in a wave of agony that felt, somehow, like being born. And then, silence. A new kind of silence, vast and strange, filled with information her human senses had never carried. Scent, in colors she couldn't name. Sound, layered and textured, making the world feel impossibly large. She was a wolf. White, she would later learn, threaded through with silver, and her eyes even now remained closed, stitched shut in this form too. A ghost wolf moving through the dark. The men around the fire scattered before her. She did not kill them with some instinct, deeper than fear or fury, held her back from that. But she scattered them, sent them fleeing to the trees, until only Gorham remained, backing away, his earlier bravado entirely gone. He stammered. I didn't know what you were. I only wanted..." "Wanted what?" The voice that cut through the clearing was Lord Drivan's. Yara recognized it immediately. Though she'd never heard it before, recognized it the way she recognized everything. By the shape of the silence around it, the calculating quality of a man used to being obeyed. He stepped into the clearing, and stopped utterly, completely staring at the white wolf before him, with a stunned recognition Yara couldn't see but could feel. "Moonblood," Drivan said, almost to himself. "After all these years, Lyrian's child." The name of her mother, spoken by a stranger, in the depths of a forest. By torchlight struck something in Yara that no human words could have reached as deeply. What followed came in pieces, Drevon's voice, low and strange with old grief, filling in shapes she had never known. He had been her mother's friend once. His own father, the same lord who had held a young Cassian captive in an eastern fortress, the very lord whose name Cassian had spoken in the cellar room, with such careful neutrality. The scars she had traced with her own fingers had also ordered the purge that drove Lorraine from her homeland, the destruction of an entire bloodline the world had thought extinguished. Drevon had spent 23 years searching for any trace of that bloodline's survival, hoping to make amends for a crime that wasn't even his. And hiring Gorham, in some twisted logic Yara still didn't fully grasp, had been part of a larger plan of destabilization, an attempt to weaken Cassian's reign through chaos at its borders, chaos that Drevane had believed would eventually force the truth about the Moonblood purge into the light. "I went too far," Drevon said quietly. "I see that now." Then the forest exploded with sound. A wolf, massive and dark, crashed into the clearing with a fury that made the ground itself seem to shake. Cassian, in his other form, was drawn back early by something he couldn't have explained, except as instinct, a pull along whatever invisible thread connected them now. He found the burns left by the wolfsbane on her wrists, even through fur, and pressed against her, his great body trembling with restrained fury, the kind that came only from absolute control over something that wanted, very badly, to destroy everything in sight. It was Yara who stopped him. She moved between him and Gorham, between him and Drevon, and though she had no words to give him in this form, something passed between them anyway, some communication older than language. "Wait, wait. I need answers. Don't take that from me." He waited. Once both men and wolves had returned to human form, Cassian's voice, cold and absolutely final, laid out terms. Gorham would lose everything, his honor, his standing, exile from Ironhold itself, a punishment that for a warrior was perhaps worse than death. Drevon's punishment was different. "You will stand before the full council," Cassian said, "and confess publicly in detail your father's role in the purge of the Moonblood line. All of it. The world will know what was done, and to whom, and why. A punishment designed not for cruelty, but for truth, the kind of reckoning that couldn't be bought or hidden, only lived through." Drevon accepted without argument. "It's more than I deserve," he said quietly, "and less than what's owed, but I'll do it." He turned toward Yara, toward the place where she stood, human again, wrapped in Cassian's cloak against the cold. "The Moonblood line predates the Wolf Kings themselves," Drevon said. "Your mother's people were the first before crowns, before kingdoms. You are not beneath this throne, Yara. You are older than that." Beside her, Yara felt Cassian's reaction, not threat, not concern for his own position, but something closer to relief, as if a weight he hadn't fully acknowledged carrying had just been set down. The journey back to Hollowmere took most of the night. For part of it, Yara rode on Cassian's back in his wolf form, her face pressed against the warm fur between his shoulders, her arms wrapped as best they could around the great breadth of him. She'd resisted at first the old instinct, the need to prove she didn't require help, that she could walk the distance herself despite the burns on her wrists and the exhaustion settling into her bones. "This isn't about helping you," Cassian had said, or rather she felt him say it, the words arriving as impressions rather than sound, some quality of their bond translating intention without a human voice. "I want to feel your heart beat against mine. On the way home." She'd climbed onto his back without further protest. The run home was long and Yara, exhausted, safe, the adrenaline of the night finally beginning to fade, found herself drifting in and out of something like sleep. her cheek against his fur, his heart beat steady and strong beneath her ear, syncing with the rhythm of his stride. This, she thought, in the warm half-dream of the journey, this is what safety feels like. I didn't know. They arrived at Hallowmere just before dawn and arrived in chaos. Harik had escaped. In the confusion of the night guards pulled from their posts to search for Yara, attention scattered across the territory, Harik had slipped free of his confinement, slipping out through the same gaps in the watch that Bran had warned were there, and now stood at the gates of Hallowmere itself, having seized Bran exhausted and shaken from a night spent organizing search parties, caught off guard by his own father. "Stay back," Harik snarled, as Cassian and Yara approached his blade pressed against his son's throat, his eyes wild with the desperation of a man who had lost everything and had nothing left to lose. "I want safe passage, out of this territory, or..." "Father," Bran said quietly, even with a blade at his throat. "Stop. Don't you dare." "Stop," Bran said again, and this time there was something different in his voice. Not fear, not pleading. Finality. The sound of a man who had spent his entire life trying to reconcile two impossible truths about his father, and had in this moment stopped trying. What happened next? Yara understood through sound rather than sight. A scuffle. Brief and decisive, Brain's own movement rather than Cassian's. The blade fell. Harik's desperate momentum carried him forward, off balance and Bran. His own son was the one who caught him, restrained him and ended it. Not with cruelty. Not with violence beyond what was necessary. Just finality. "It's over," Bran said, to his father, in a voice that sounded older than it had the day before. "It's actually over now." Harik was led away to permanent exile, though alive. Bran stood for a long moment afterward, breathing hard, staring at nothing. And Yara, moving toward him without quite deciding to, found his arm and pressed her hand against it briefly. "You did the right thing," she said quietly. Bran's breath shook, just once. "I know," he said. "That doesn't make it easy." "No," Yara agreed. "It doesn't have to be easy to be right." The gathering took place at midday, in the courtyard, beneath a sky that Yara could feel as warmth on her skin. Cassian spoke to the assembled pack, and there was something new in his voice now, something Yara hadn't heard before. Not just a king's voice. A man's too open, in a way kings rarely allowed themselves to be. He spoke of the night's events, the kidnapping, Yara's transformation, the resolution in the forest, and then, where she expected the formal conclusion, the prepared phrasing of a king ending a speech, he said something that hadn't been part of any plan. 3 nights ago, this woman bandaged a wound for a stranger she'd never met. In the dark, without knowing who he was. She showed kindness with absolutely nothing to gain from it. I spent my life surrounded by people who wanted something from me. She wanted nothing. His voice was quiet now, carrying not by force, but by the complete absence of anything false in it. I intend to spend the rest of my life proving I'm worthy of that kindness. The courtyard still had the particular silence of people witnessing something important, even if they couldn't have articulated exactly why. Heat rose in Yara's face, not quite embarrassment. Something warmer, more complicated than that. "You're terrible at politics," she said into the silence quiet, but clear enough to carry, and she felt the ripple of surprise move through the gathered crowd, followed quickly by laughter, bright and relieved. Announcing things like that in front of everyone. But then her voice lost its dryness, softened in a way she hadn't entirely planned. "You picked wild strawberries for me, and you bandaged a stranger's wound, and let her tell you how, in the dark, without complaining once. I suppose that's worth something." "Is that an acceptance?" Cassian asked, and she heard the smile in his voice. "It's an observation," Yara said. "Draw your own conclusions." He laughed, that same surprised, helpless laugh from the tribute rite, days ago, that felt like a lifetime ago now. What followed, Yara would carry with her for the rest of her life, not as memory alone, but as something written into her skin, into the rhythm of her own pulse. His hands found her face, the way hers had found his on the watchtower, tracing, learning, the way she had taught him to read the world with his fingers. She felt his thumbs rest at her temples, felt him still, just for a moment, as if memorizing her the way she memorized everything that mattered. Then lower his lips against the curve of her throat, where her pulse beat fastest, a claiming mark given and received in the oldest language either of them knew. Afterward, in the quiet that followed, Yara reached for his hand and guided it to the bracelet at her wrist, the wolf and the crescent moon, carved by a man who had understood her without ever needing to see her. And then she guided his hand further to her own chest, where her heart beat steady and sure beneath his palm. "Feel that," she said softly. "That's the first time in my life it's beat like that without being afraid." Cassian's hand remained where she'd placed it, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. There was nothing that needed saying. Around them, midday light spread across Hallowmere light that Yara would never see, but that she felt now, for the first time, not as something missing from her life, but as warmth on her skin, as the world made new. A kingdom remapped, not in sight, but in touch, in trust, in the steady and certain rhythm of two hearts that had finally, after everything, found the same beat. There is a kind of strength the world rarely celebrates, the strength of someone who has been overlooked, diminished, and forgotten, yet still chooses kindness, still chooses dignity. They still choose themselves. Yara never asked to be saved. She asked for nothing at all, and perhaps that is exactly why she was impossible to forget. This story is a reminder that the people who demand the least from the world are sometimes the ones who change it most quietly, not through grand declarations, but through small, steady acts of grace in the dark. A wound bound without asking why, a coin kept without knowing what it meant, a silence that said more than any words. You don't have to be seen to matter. You don't have to be loud to be powerful. Sometimes the most profound things happen in the dark, between two strangers who didn't yet know they were finding their way home. If this story left something sitting in your chest, a feeling you can't quite name yet, drop it in the comments. We read every single one, and honestly, your words are what keep us making these. Hit like if Yara lives rent-free in your head now. Subscribe so you never miss the next one. And thank you genuinely for watching all the way here.